And the best way to address that is in about a year and a half. And the next way to address that is in about 3.5 years. That's how you address elections, in my view.
Thank you for coming, Rick. Really appreciate it.
Check my time. All right.
Yeah, I know. I'm a grandmother and a great-grandmother, and my question for you is, what goals do you think that the Department of Education will outline for the nation over the next 4 years, and then what do you think those goals should be?
I think that you are going to hear from the Secretary of Education. She outlines goals for the education of the future, that it is going to be things that you agree with. She will talk about the goal of quality education for everybody. She will talk about access to higher education and helping people afford that. That's how those goals will be outlined. It won't be, my goal is to destroy public education in this country. Okay? That won't be how Secretary DeVos puts it. So what I suggest is to lift the veil on what she says and look at what they do. I assure you we are going to have voucher votes this year in Congress. We're going to have vouchers for public education, taking money from public education for private school vouchers. We are going to have those votes again. Now, we survived the 2000s when we had those votes. We worked hard, we'll survive that again, but we're going to have those votes. I don't know that she's going to be able to do anything. I don't know that she wants to do anything on access to and affordability for higher education, because she hasn't really said anything about it. But I know that my concern, it puts the Pell Grant, the #1 source of federal financial aid in America, it puts Pell Grants at risk for what they want to do. And third, I think that they will attempt to move the federal loan system for college loans back to the private sector. So the subsidized federal loans back to the private sector. So I think that's what they'll do, and I think they'll try to re-energize these for-profit technical colleges that had. Well, it might be something. So you can ask me what I think the goals will be. But the goals are going to be great, because the language she's going to use is going to be great. But that's not going to be what they do. Now, if you want to know what I think, just play the opposite game with everything I said. You know, I think we need to increase Pell Grant funding. I think we need to move back to. It may take a generation, but it took a generation to get to the point where we used to have grants, $3 in grants and $1 in loans, and we went $1 in loans and $3 in grants. It'll take a generation to get back to 3-to-1 grants and loans, but that we should start setting the stage and working to do that. We should be supporting public education. We should not voucherize public education or use public dollars to pay for private school vouchers. We should we should hold accountable these for-profit technical schools. Not put them out of business, but hold them accountable for their training, their education, and for how their folks get employed. I think that's what we ought to be doing, and we shouldn't give the private sector, we shouldn't give subsidized student loan system back to the private sector. I'm not going to be the Secretary of Education. Not now, and certainly not in a Democratic administration. But that's what I think we ought to do. Are you kidding me? We're wearing a Nats hat. You want me to call on you? We're wearing a Washington Nationals hat? All right, but only this once.
I have a healthcare question. What is your position, and can you comment a little bit on firearms control?
Yeah. I support gun safety legislation. I don't think we ought to allow folks who are on the no-fly list to buy guns. I think that when I was on the floor of the House in June with John Lewis and others doing the sit-in, that we made it very clear what we thought of a no-fly, no-buy, and also that it was very clear that the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention should be able to use federal dollars to study gun safety and gun violence as a public health measure. I think that we need to close the gun show loophole, requiring background checks at gun shows, and internet sales of guns. We need to stop that. That's the start.
Thank you.
And so far, I haven't said anything that takes a gun away from anybody in this country. So it is a false narrative from the NRA that any of this is going to impact the gun ownership. So it's a little after 4. If I got it right? I can't even see that. Is it right?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I can't even see the clock right there. So if folks are going to go, you can go. I got a few more minutes for a few more questions. Let's go here.
The Russian Trump thing is very alarming. And I just don't want to show whatever. I just want to know out of other Democrats that are thinking it has to be investigated for 30 mile long.
So the question's about something you described as the Russian-Putin-Trump thing. I call it the Russian-Putin-Trump nexus. A little more connection, it seems to me. And I have spoken out against it. I yesterday called on Jeff Sessions to resign. It is one thing to meet with ambassadors when you're a member of Congress doing member of Congress stuff. I have met with the Russian ambassador. I was in a room with over 100 other Democrats, listening to a panel of 4 ambassadors, Russia, Germany, France, and England, and UK, talking about the Iran nuclear deal. That was my meeting with the Russian ambassador. That is not the same as meeting the Russian ambassador in your office, alone, in October, before the election, and saying, we didn't talk about the campaign, but I can't remember what we talked about. You want confidence in your Attorney General? Before 2 days ago, I disagreed a lot with Jeff Sessions. So that's one thing. Well, this is, I'm just going to go down the list. One of the either the Washington Post or the New York Times today did a graphic that really sort of outlines connections that have been made between folks who are in the president's close circle and Russian officials. And I would just say that I'm not going to make any argument, you'll never find me making an argument that attempted Russian interference in our election had an outcome on the election. But it ought to be enough for the President of the United States that there was an attempt by a foreign power, in this case the Russians, to directly influence the outcome of the election. Maybe not by changing votes, but by changing opinions. And it should be enough, therefore, for the President to get on board with everyone else and demand that there be a full investigation into this. And what we do is prevent impeachment. And the idea that he can't even bring himself to that because it's all about him, not good. Granted, you're an elected official, it's always all about yourself. Guys. But not all of the time. When it comes down to the future and the integrity of our democratic republic and the election system, it is not about yourself. It is about the integrity.
Beyond the election, what kind of records are we having on him now with all this money that he doesn't want us to know about?
Well, release his tax returns and we can answer that question. I don't know. Release the tax returns. Always hope. You were standing up and back and you moved up. I don't know if I should call you for that. I'm rewarded for that. Go ahead.
I'm really concerned about voter suppression. So that's gerrymandering, making things more difficult, shutting down aren't aware of is cross-check, which is a concerted Republican effort to kick people off the voter rolls, and they don't even know it. They vote and take their votes counted. So what can I do, and what can you do, me on the state, local level, you on the national?
At the state and local level, I don't know if we have a big problem, but always ensuring that the local officials who are responsible for elections aren't doing that, or if they are purging voter rolls, it's because they're following the process that does exist for purging voter rolls. And there is a process for purging voter rolls. People haven't voted in 20 years, or some, in some amount of time, but a long time. They do try to, keep the voter rolls clean in that regard. So they're not sending out votes that just end up in the garbage can or end up floating around going nowhere. So ensuring that local elected officials responsible for elections have a good process, a clean process, an established public process for cleaning up the voter rolls. Because it does need to happen. Otherwise, my dad would still be registered, and he died in 2008. Right? He shouldn't be on the voter rolls. So you have to have that process, ensuring your local electors do it. Same at the state level. Secretary of State who are responsible for that, and working through your local legislators to ensure that Secretary of States have a clean, open, public process for cleaning up the rolls, the voting rolls. At the national, so that's at the state level. At the national level, we need to pass the Voting Rights Advancement Act, which is the bill that would fix the Shelby County problem that occurred, Shelby County versus Holder decision. The Supreme Court got rid of a key section of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that got rid of the formula which we use to determine if states and counties come off of the federal review list. You have to review certain states and counties in those states if they make changes to election laws to ensure that it's not being done to suppress votes. And the day after the Supreme Court made that decision, Texas introduced its voter ID law. Or it's one more voter suppression law, the additional voter suppression law. We don't have voter ID laws in this state because you need an ID to register to vote, but we vote by mail, so you are your voter ID person. So you can't do voter ID, and we don't have voter fraud, but we do have high penalties for voter fraud in the state, prison time, $10,000 fines, but we also have low hurdles, so we combine low hurdles with high penalties. In fact, the most recent example of voter fraud was a person in Texas who voted for Mitt Romney 8 years ago and was not eligible to vote, and now is 8 years in prison, and that's fine with me. That's fine with me. So when voter fraud does exist, honestly, it's been less about, when voting problems does exist, it's been less about people voting who shouldn't vote, and more about legislatures closing down polling places, putting in onerous voter suppression identification rules and laws, getting rid of the time frames in which people are allowed to vote. And the Voter Rights Advancement Act would address Shelby County as well as address some of these broader issues about making the poll available to people so they can vote within a reasonable time frame. Do you have a follow-up?
Our Republican Secretary of State, she's taken Koch brothers funded trips with the NRA and other groups that are behind a lot of this effort. So, we think Washington's a blue state. No, it's going to be done here.
I would say none of that prevents you from holding her or anyone else accountable. It doesn't matter, it does matter in one respect, it doesn't matter when it comes to you holding electeds accountable. And you have state legislators, maybe not in Island County, but maybe in Island County, and around the state, who can hold folks like our Secretary of State and other statewide electeds accountable for what they're doing. Regardless of whether they went on one trip, and I'm sorry she did that, but that should not be, should prevent you from holding anyone accountable for the integrity of the voter rolls.
It tells me I need to watch.
Yeah.
Tells me you should be watching all of us regardless. Honestly. Yeah. I'm gonna hang it up. It's 4:35.
Yes.
Okay. It's 4:35, and I want to thank folks for coming out.